to today's Chief Data and Technology Officer Summit, the fourth in our six-part series running June through November. I'm Caitlin Halferty, Director of our IBM AI Accelerator and host of our Summit Series. The mission of our AI Accelerator is to take the leading data and AI capabilities that we have deployed internally at scale within IBM and bring them forward to this community to hopefully help you in your AI transformations. Today, we will highlight a new capability around data privacy that I hope will be very helpful for you. For many of us, we are now 5 to 6 months into this COVID-19 global pandemic, balancing quarantine guidance with work and home responsibilities. Thank you for continuing to invest your time to join our Summit Series. Community is so important as we navigate personal and business resiliency. It is my sincere hope that you find these summits worthwhile in these unprecedented times. Today, we are deep diving on data privacy and governance. Data privacy protection is driving new regulations around the world, and we know as we all work to protect data privacy online and in person and improve personal data protection, the organizations that go beyond just complying with all the new requirements will build trust with consumers and users and stand out from their competitors. We also know per recent data privacy study we conducted, 75% of firms identify data privacy as a strategic priority, yet as few as 28% have complete confidence in their firm's ongoing ability to adhere to these requirements. A full 77% expect the number of regulations to grow, and specific to the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, nearly 80% confirm that compliance is still a work in progress. We have structured today's conversation to reflect those findings and bring to you the best perspectives from diverse viewpoints. We have USA Insurance talking about the innovative approach and results they have seen with their data privacy programs. USAA is well known for setting the gold standard in customer care and engagement. How have they maintained this trust in unprecedented times? As always, we strive to bring you cross-industry perspectives beyond financial services. We also have the Chief Product and Technology Officer of WWE sharing how they have built a brand that engages over 1 billion social media followers worldwide, the largest of all sports leagues globally. They've pivoted to deliver a one-of-a-kind immersive virtual fan experience with the Thunderdome during global pandemic, and done so with data privacy in the center of that fan experience. And we have our very own Chief Privacy Officer of IBM sharing how we protect and empower our clients and customers from a privacy perspective. Please post your questions in the chat. We'll be sure to get them addressed. Thank you for joining us today. With that, let me turn it over to our summit partner, Dave Matheson, CEO, CDO Club. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for that eloquent summary of the issues surrounding data privacy and governance. Welcome back to everyone. It's great to see you all again. I'm David Matheson, the founder and CEO of the CDO Club and CTO Summit. And of course, welcome back to our special guest, Inderpal Bhandari, the Global Chief Data Officer at IBM. Great to see you again, Inderpal.
It's good to be here, Dave.
How do you define data governance and privacy, and what are some of the current issues around that?
It's a central question to chief data officers. It's about finding the right balance between data monetization and risk reduction. Because if you think of what CDOs are primarily charged with, there are 3 aspects to it. Boost the top line, improve the bottom line, reduce the risk. And how you go about doing that, that's what data governance is about. Because if you put in too many speed bumps, you're not going to be able to boost the growth. You might not even be able to improve the bottom line. If you put too few, you could increase the risk that's associated with those activities and initiatives. So it's all about finding that right balance. And that's what a good data governance framework is about. It enables you to move forward while at the same time bringing the risk level down to acceptable levels. Now, within that, there's a whole slew of activities. What I tell my peers is, if you keep those 3 things in mind, it generally begins to make sense. So for instance, one of the major initiatives around data governance is data quality. Because if you don't have data that's of sufficient quality, it's unlikely that you will be able to boost growth or improve the bottom line. If your customer names are not correctly represented, or if they are represented in a way that there is ambiguity, and you're using that for some sales initiative, you're not going to be successful. If your offerings, if that is not of sufficient quality, you won't be able to improve your bottom line. So eventually you can take any of those major activities that come under data governance. It's eventually about one of those three things. What you're trying to do is to keep the flow going so that the data can actually flow to get things done, whether it be innovation for new products or insights around processes and reducing cycle time. It's all about being able to keep that flow going sufficiently so you attain and hit those targets while minimizing the risk. So with regard to privacy, because you've got enterprises now that collect so much data, and if they are far-flung global enterprises, that data has to flow across different regions, geographical regions, and so forth. What ends up happening is if you have sensitive data that you can actually use to identify a person, there's all kinds of regulations and safeguards that you have to make sure you have in place for that data. And that's really what privacy is about, is making sure that you're able to safeguard the personally identifiable data that you're collecting. You mentioned AI and analytics and so forth. I tend to look at all of those the same way, in the sense that if you apply analytics and AI, what those processes do is that they actually create new data. If you're looking at some data set and you come up with an insight, then that's what's known as derived data. So you're creating new data. And so you have to view that with exactly the same kind of eye. That makes those processes even trickier, because sometimes you start off with data sets that are non-sensitive and you end up getting a derived data that in fact actually is sensitive. So you have to be extremely alert to that. You have to prepare your workforce that this is something that can happen, so they're able to do it. You know, there's the famous example, retail example, that noticed that somebody was on prenatal vitamins and inferred that person is pregnant. Now, that's a perfect example of, you start off with the grocery stuff, then you go to something that's highly sensitive and you shouldn't be using it. The way to address those things is to go with the preparation of your actual frontline workforce that's doing the analytics and the AI. But that's why I tend to treat those as pretty much the same animal, because eventually it's the results that's produced from those processes with AI and analytics. And you want to make sure that you are handling that derived data the same way as you would do the other data with regard to the privacy regulations.
Interpol, how is IBM prepared for privacy regulations that are growing and evolving and becoming increasingly complex?
We had a trial by fire with EU GDPR. That was the first major event that went after privacy of sensitive data, being able to afford rights to the individuals whose data you had captured and so forth. And it was a complicated piece of regulation. We've always been an organization that's been high on data governance, pride ourselves in terms of treating our clients' data as their data, never our data. You know, even the insights from those things are their data. So we have a culture around that. We have a business model that doesn't depend on us doing things with the data. So we were pretty confident going in that this is something we'll be able to handle very easily. But what we realized was it was a complicated regulation that not only had to do with the internals of our organization, but also it had to do with how data was handled by vendors and subcontractors, etc., who were all processing data on our behalf. And that became a very, very complicated thing very quickly, as you can imagine, with a company of our size, global reach, and scale. And so we had to really scramble to get all that done. We got everything done on time. There was a lot of manual work that went into doing that. But it also gave us some real learning on how to get ready for the next such regulations. And you can see those regulations coming, right? They're coming statewide in the US. India is even introducing regulation, or considering, I should say, regulation around non-PI data. So this is just going to become more and more intense as governments recognize that the information about the individual is being utilized by business. There are really not enough safeguards around them. And so perhaps the individual should have more control on their own data. And So we recognize that we have to get to a place where it's largely automated. So every time there's a new regulation, that we'll be able to address the new regulation in a manner that's highly, highly automated, as opposed to the manual scramble that we had to go through for EU GDPR. And our ace in the hole really eventually came down to artificial intelligence, because we were already on the path of infusing AI into every business process. We already had worked on a central data and AI enablement platform across the company. And now we took that and we started applying it to privacy, being able to identify sensitive data, highlight it in all the different siloed applications, looking at the operational data that came in from privacy assessments, just across the board. Not to say that we are fully done yet, but in terms of a strategy, that's what we've embarked on. And that's been tremendously helpful in terms of enabling us to scale rapidly to address new regulations by having, a kind of an end-to-end flow that is supported intensively by automated processes and artificial intelligence. That's been a huge thing. And for us, it's a big deal because we have some very complicated services like a GTS business unit that's both controller and processor in terms of many of the things that it does. It's just a complicated environment. And I think that's the biggest lesson that we learned, that, yeah, we can pull it off manually. We were able to galvanize the company to get everything done. Now, for the second go around, obviously, it's going to be much smoother, much more prepared, much more facile. So AI, I think, has been one key aspect of it. The other key technical aspect that we are writing on is our hybrid cloud framework. The hybrid cloud, you're really assuming that your technical environment is spread across multiple public clouds, private clouds, as well as on-prem hardware and software. Now you want to make sure that you are being compliant with regulations across the board, no matter which environment you're in. You might think that, well, it's more complicated, but actually it gives you even more flexibility, because traditionally the way people have handled regulations is they look at 10 different regulations and then take the one that's most restrictive, standardize for that, and then that's it. With our hybrid cloud approach coupled with AI, we're able to actually configure aspects of data processing so that you're able to appropriately access and process data in compliance with all these different regulations. So for example, if you think in terms of access control to data, we would obviously have access control that was determined by the role of the user, but also policies that had to do with these regulations, which would be, some of those would be implemented at runtime. If Dave, if you were in the US, you'd be allowed access to some data, but if you were going down to Germany and you're logging in from there, you may not be able to do so. So those are the types of things that in a hybrid environment, we've been able to enable the next level of flexibility to be able to address and handle these regulations by a mix of predefined, but then also runtime automation. And the smarts with hybrid cloud as well as AI is kind of what's helping us arrive at that.
Any of our viewers want to see a great session on hybrid cloud, our last CDO Summit with IBM in August featured Chief Technology Officer of the NBA, Krishna Bhagavatula. We had the Chief Technology Officer from Red Hat, and we had Chief Digital and Technology Officers from J.D. Power and Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And some of that covered hybrid cloud to our next event coming up in October, where we're going to focus on use cases for the hybrid cloud.
Great. And one of the use cases will actually be around privacy and governance.
A lot of the CTOs and CDOs who are on the call, the reason they come back, they get great takeaways that they can apply in their own organization. What do you think is the biggest benefit that companies can realize from having a holistic privacy strategy?
Today's world, with the level of intensity around cybercrime, cyber attacks, data theft, ransomware, et cetera, clients, stakeholders, they have to be able to trust the companies that they deal with. And this goes to trust. Any data leak, any mishap like that erodes the trust that the company has, that the brand has with the parties that are affected. I've been in situations where we've actually had to do repair work because data leak, or may not, in some cases, even not data leak, just data was lost. then that resulted in a tremendous fall in the reputation of the operation that was involved. So this is why having a holistic policy around privacy and data and cybersecurity, governance, these things become extremely important to foster the trust that's necessary with your clients and stakeholders.
We did have an event in July on AI, ethics, and trust. Francesca Rossi from IBM, the Chief Privacy Officer at US Bank, and Jerry Gupta from Swiss Re. Really appreciate that thoughtful overview, Inderpal. And next up, we're going to explore these issues more deeply with executives from USAA, WWE, and IBM. Thanks again, Inderpal, for your time today. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Rajan Mehta, Executive Vice President, Chief Product and Technology Officer at WWE, Alan Crane, who's Associate Vice President at USAA, and Christina Montgomery, Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer at IBM. What do you see as organizations facing the issues of data privacy and governance today? Rajan?
Yeah, and Dave, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to join the group today. On the data governance side, I think one thing that a lot of us are taking a look at are all the variations and the differences in the regulations as you go country by country or within the United States, state by state. I think those nuances and the differences between that adds a lot of complexity that organizations need to manage.
Great, thanks, Rajan. Same question for Alan.
For our work, I think data governance is a part of a bigger migration to the cloud and making sure that we can demonstrate and deliver the same kind of data quality and data governance in the cloud and that we do in our on-premise systems that we've grown to love for the last several decades. And that also flows into privacy and making sure that we build the right kind of trusted systems in place wherever they're deployed, cloud or otherwise, that gives the same kind of confidence both internally and externally to our company as well as our membership.
Christina, big issues facing organizations about data privacy and governance.
For us as a company that's a trusted steward of our clients' most valuable data for more than 100 years, it's a lot of now in the complex regulatory landscape that's evolving. I think it's really a combination of the exponential data collection, rapidly evolving technology, and a complex regulatory environment that we have to stay on top of as a company that does business in 170 countries around the world.
In your role as EVP and Chief Product and Technology Officer, you have a wide range of responsibilities for WWE's digital products and technology team, the data engineering team, corporate IT and cybersecurity teams. What has the digital transformation journey been like?
If you look at just the history of WWE, part of what's in our DNA has been the ability to take calculated risks and reinvent ourselves as needed. So if you go back to the 80s with pay-per-view television, you look at closed circuit TV, broad cable distribution of our content, we've always taken the calculated risk and tried to stay slightly ahead of the curve. So if you look at about 6 years ago, we launched the WWE Network. And it was really one of the first in its kind, direct to consumer, reaching out to our fans directly at a point in time in the industry where a lot of streaming platforms weren't available. Today, there's a lot, but if you think back in 2014, there really wasn't that many. So in order to do something like that, you really have to change your culture. And part of what we did was really transform to a data-driven organization. So back in, if you look at 2013 and so on our direct-to-consumer portfolio, our data team was really folks who looked at www.com, looked at Google Analytics, and it was a smaller subset. As we drove into the direct-to-consumer aspect, that grew exponentially. And that's had this cascading effect throughout the organization. So when you start looking at the other areas that I manage, part of the data engineering team responsibility was to help drive data usage across all of our company, across different divisions, in the direct-to-consumer space, but also in the day-to-day business. And we cascaded that through our corporate IT organization and so on. So that transformation takes time. A lot of it starts with people and the DNA of the company.
USAA has long been a benchmark for exceptional customer experience, and I think sound privacy policies enable that. Customers know that their data is in good hands. And also, congratulations to you for taking on the broader responsibility of Chief Privacy Officer for Insurance and Cloud Migration. Given your new responsibilities, Alan, what have been your priorities?
Yeah, thank you for having me. When I took on the role a year ago, my senior leader told me, all you need to do is make sure that our data in the cloud is better than what we have today on premise. And then he said, if that doesn't scare you, then you don't understand the job yet. So, the first thing we focused on when I took over was the idea of information stewardship. Because at USAA, our data is actually owned by the business. And today, 100% of the data in the insurance company that we manage has an accountable information executive that's ultimately responsible for that data. So our information governance teams execute the program management and those policies, but the stewardship model puts their skin in the game. And people really get to know their data when they know they're graded on it. And then the second priority that we focused on was data quality. That means we have to understand the data to the field level, the domain values in that data, and any anomalies that are in that data before we even think about loading it. And so we've introduced machine learning capabilities to do automated anomaly detection before we even get started with those data. And this helps us to attain better than 99.999% data quality. And this all leads to sensitive data management and privacy, because whether that means encryption, tokenization, or deletion, we have to protect our members' data at all costs, whether that's at rest or in motion. And because this is the foundation of our new privacy office, to be able to pinpoint where the sensitive data is, who controls access to it, who doesn't have access to it. I'm happy to say that in this last year, 100% of all of our sensitive data fields have also been remediated. And so we have a lot of metrics around these things because they are so critical to our success, whether that's data quality, metadata, or sensitive data management.
Christina, over to you. As VP and Chief Privacy Officer over at IBM, what are your priorities? What initiatives have you received value from? And lastly, what metrics do you use to measure success regarding privacy and governance?
Our first priority, top priority, is to maintain the trust of our clients and to protect our brand, right? So everything we do revolves around trust. And we talked earlier about some of the challenges that we're all facing around data privacy and data governance. And at IBM, we've essentially embraced those challenges like our scope and scale and leverage them by turning them into advantages and strengths. So my office teams very closely with our chief data office, our chief information office, our security team, legal, and our policy team, and business privacy leaders in every business unit. In fact, my function now, for the last year, we're embedded in the business. We're not part of the law department. We had been before, but we're very much more operational and hands-on and embedded in the business. And we've tackled a number of global initiatives and processes designed to automate and accelerate our compliance activities and to track them and to implement actions and remediation. So we've completely overhauled, from a privacy perspective, our global privacy assessment process so that we can ensure an accurate record of our data processing activities and our data flows and adapt really quickly to changing regulations. We share metrics, a number of metrics with the business units, so they get sort of a scorecard, and we're building that out over time as well. So what we have right now is we've sort of divided them into client-centric metrics and IBM-centric metrics. And we calculate things like data subject access requests that used to drive 1,000 tasks across the business units, application owners, and now we've kind of streamlined that as much as possible and automated it as much as possible. And we track that and we show the business units how they're handling those and how we're complying with those. Completion status of things like global privacy assessments so that we can make sure when a new regulation comes up like LGPD, how are the business units doing and getting their assets on board. So it's a lot of those, and we'll continue to look at new metrics to measure. And again, a lot is focused on scale and automation and making it easier for our business units to comply with regulations.
Welcome to Long Beach Surfers Paradise this week. Had a lot of action out there. But before I jump out and hit the waves, I want to thank our guests, Interpol Bhandari, Rajan, Alan Crane, and Christina Montgomery. It's great to see everybody else here. Thanks so much to everyone who's joining. We're going to take a pulse poll now. You could see that poll in front of you, just 3 questions. While you're taking the poll, just a reminder that all of our guest speakers are going to be available at the end for live QA. So I hope you're going to stick around for that. So take a look at the results of that poll. Question number 1 was, does your firm consider data privacy a strategic priority? And yes was about 95%. Second question, do you have complete confidence in your firm's ongoing ability to adhere to privacy requirements? Your responses again, so 93% said yes, complete, or yes, somewhat. And finally, question 3 was, do you expect your firm's capabilities to grow in order to comply with ongoing privacy regulations. And once again, we've got about 95% saying yes. So thanks so much to everybody for participating in that poll. Remember to stick around. We're going to go to part 2 of the panel now, but we'll be joined at the end with live Q&A from all of our speakers. So stick around. See you soon. Back over to Rajan. I interviewed Mark Keys, who was there in like 2011, 2013, at our first ever CDO Summit. Some of his metrics, he took the Facebook page from 2.5 million fans to 33 million. He had a growth rate of 1,320% in 14 months. How is WWE leveraging data to connect with fans?
So Mark was probably a little bit before my time, but I can throw a few new metrics in there if it's helpful. So our latest piece there, just on social media across all of our platforms, we have over 1 billion social media followers, right? So when you look at the scale of WWE, that billion followers, let alone just the amount of posts and so on, but we have 1 billion followers on our social platforms. If you look at
That's
YouTube,
wild.
Yeah, if you look at YouTube specifically, we are the largest sports channel on YouTube. Think of all the sports leagues, we're the most viewed sports channel. We have over 45 billion lifetime views on our YouTube channel. It's the 4th largest actually YouTube channel just in general, if you get out of the sports genre. So it is a large footprint, a big global following. We're available in over 180 countries, 28 languages. 800 million households. So in terms of the trends, technology always continues to evolve. We do that, I like to say well at WWE, using some of these social pieces. We started social media and really driving our content many years ago, long before a lot of the followers and so on, before we had some of these counts, as you're referring to back in 2011. And some of those are strategic bets. You know that where people and where audience is going, and that's where we are. We know where our fans are going. We know where our audience is. So social platforms, direct to consumer service. So we leverage a lot of technologies to grow the business. So then you start going on to, on the data specific side and the value that provides. If you look at our business, the social media side that I was talking about, our WWE network, we also have a direct-to-consumer commerce business, so WWE Shop, where we're selling product and merchandise directly to our fans as well. You start seeing all these different touch points, right? And you have a shop touch point, you have a network touch point, you have a social media touch point, but really what you have is this fan in the middle, right? And so how we looked at it was this kind of wheel with a fan in the middle. And so that 360 piece around the fan was really valuable for us. So if we had, fans of ours that were creating WWE accounts and they are, purchasing merchandise from Roman Reigns or John Cena, and they also happen to be a WWE Network subscriber, hey, this is great. How do I surface more of the content that they want to see? Really start getting that touch point, not only from the service that they're at, but also how do you get it across different services? So for us, things like that have been really helpful, leveraging data for subscriber acquisition, subscriber retention, merchandising, and as you were getting at, is how we have to restructure and rethink through our business all the time. We're a company that does 500 to 600 live events on an annual basis. With obviously with COVID in place, we have to really think through new models of bringing our fans in. I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but about a month ago, we launched a WWE Thunderdome. And that is something that just hasn't been done. We have the ability to have 1,000 fans live watch our programming and then see themselves. Fans are loving it. And then part of all of these different touch points, one of the things that we do is the social listening. We hear what our fans are saying. We hear what they want to see, right? And they're very vocal, as you had talked about. So the onus is on us to hear, right? And so we've built out technology on the social listening side to make our products even better.
You guys with the NBA, you go neck and neck. We had the chief technology officer of the NBA on our last call, Krishna Bhagavatula. For those of you who haven't watched it yet, I would highly recommend checking that out in the archives. Do you think that data security risk has increased, stayed the same, or decreased with the rapid adoption globally of work from home?
Well, David, I can't believe you're asking me to follow Rajan, the insurance guy, the WWE guy. Well, one thing I was thinking about that he said that we actually do have in common is that they put the fan in the middle with all these different touch points around it. That's what we do at USAA for our member. Our member is at the center of everything that we do, and our members' security and privacy is a big piece of that. So this question actually is very pertinent to our ability to keep the member at the center. Because, the very fact that we aren't going into a secure building anymore does increase the risk of any one individual pretty substantially. And like most companies that have secure VPNs and multi-factor authentication that we all deploy, the network may be secure, but we all know it doesn't end there. There are new second and third order issues that we just haven't worked through yet completely. So one example is we've seen an increase in cyber attacks on some of the vendors that we use. A vendor we use for analysis was attacked and they shut down their operations for a couple of weeks, which then impacted our ability to have operational reporting that we contract with them. Once they determined that our data wasn't affected, then they were able to get up and running, but it was still an operational impact to our business. Now, can I say that was 100% a work from home problem? I can't really say that, but when you think about it though, when your entire ecosystem is work from home, to include your employees, your third-party providers, your contractors, consultants, onshore, global, they're coming in from all over the world from their own home environment, that's a lot of security to manage. And especially when a lot of work from home operations were deployed in a very, very fast amount of time back in the March and April timeframe. You just got to ask, were all of those boxes checked along the way when you think of that entire ecosystem? Because that's just a lot of exposure. The other thing is work from home makes eavesdropping easier. What if you're in a conference call on a sensitive topic and your Alexa or Google smart speaker picks that up on the conversation? Or your work from home spouse or roommate is within hearing range and they're also on a Zoom call. Or what if you're logged in at your outside patio because it's such an awesome day outside? Who's potentially overhearing your conversations? Who else could be eavesdropping on the company's new merger or the confidential discussion about a key executive that's about to be let go? I don't know about you, but when I'm wearing a headset, I tend to pace around and raise my voice without even thinking about it. We have to be mindful of those kinds of things, of who else could be listening. And then finally, I'm beginning to think that our mental line between work and home is actually starting to blur. And I think about this, see employees who are transitioning from confidential work conversations to their, Zoom happy hour in just a matter of minutes. We talk a lot about work-life balance, but I think it sometimes can be hard to also unplug when you've been going all day, meeting to meeting to meeting, or if the experience feels the same. So I think that's just another thing that we need to keep mindful of these new potential work from home leaks.
Christina, boards of directors, they're charged with governance and overseeing the organization. How does the board of directors ensure more effective data governance within a corporation?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, the board's responsible for oversight effectively, and they're setting the tone from the top for pretty much everything. Importantly, that includes data governance and the ethical use of data as well. I come at this question from an interesting perspective because I was corporate secretary at IBM for almost 5 years. So I sat in on 5 years worth of board meetings. And I saw important topics, sort of the precursors to data governance and AI ethics before we were talking about them, right? That are still incredibly important topics. Cybersecurity, enterprise risk management, GDPR from, the conceptual stage when it was originally proposed to how the company is going to address and ensure compliance by the effective date. Strategy discussions, all of those around data and AI, what you're hearing from investors and bringing those back to a board. What I found is our board essentially ensures effective oversight by bringing a regular cadence of those topics forward, holding management accountable, asking the right questions. It's almost a forcing function to have it on a board agenda. Stuff's going to get done when you're reporting out to your board. And part of management's task is also to help the board to ask the right questions and to give the right level of detail because they're fiduciaries. So this topic became critically important. It's part of the reason why the CPO role now is one that's in the business. And my job also is to co-chair an AI ethics board at IBM. That's in part coming from this need to ensure that we have effective governance around important topics like data ethics and like privacy. I've certainly found that our board has been very instrumental in helping to ensure the ethical use of data throughout the corporation here at IBM.
These are pretty exciting times for digital data and cybersecurity leaders because finally they're getting those roles on boards of publicly traded companies. At the CDO Club, we're the really only organization that tracks the number of CDOs who become CEO and the number of CDOs who become NED, non-executive director or board director. And the amazing thing is this year, in the first half of this year, we had double the amount of all of last year of people, CDOs who became board directors. The majority of those were women. Sheila Jordan, Chief Digital and Technology Officer over at Honeywell, she joined the board of Slack. The woman over at Microsoft joined the board of nVent. The risks and the penalties for non-compliance could put you right out of business. These are challenging times. So maybe to wrap up, question for all of us, what advice would you all give other organizations that are trying to operationalize good data governance and privacy framework and policies? We'll start with Rajan.
Yep. So, you kind of touched on these three key areas, and it's almost like a concentric, circles, right? So you have this data-driven piece, and you want to do privacy by design, right? And there's like cybersecurity or security by design. You want to make sure they all work together. So to do that, a lot of it's, you got to get the right process in place, but really important is getting the right people. Like you have to drive this through your culture, right? And you have to have people who are embracing it and driving it, whether it's, your data engineers, whether it's your data scientists, whether it's your marketers sending out email. The awareness on data protection, privacy, governance really has to be across the board. It can't sit in one department. It's just really got to be how your company operates, and driving that's tough. It's not easy. It's cultural change. It's new, but that's really, really important to get this right.
I boil it down to it's about being intentional about these things. It really comes from the top. So we have to make space for it. We have to make space for these processes and policies to really be fleshed out within our own teams. Governance and privacy are not just another thing, or these things do not happen on their own. They have to be led with intentionality. I was just talking with a colleague of mine who said, it took 3 FTEs on my team, 100% of their time for 6 months just to get our documentation up to snuff for these models. And she said, gosh, that was just such an enormous amount of their time for something that was just more of an administrative activity. But then the more we talked, she said, but you know what? Now that I think about it, it takes a special company to give you 3 FTEs to spend 6 months on that.
Yeah.
And when you think about the leadership that they could have chosen to spend those resources in another area, that's actually pretty profound to be able to say, my leadership made the space, created the time, gave me the resources so that we could do this. Because these are things that don't just happen on their own.
Christina, summing it up, same question to you. What advice would you give your peers and other companies trying to operationalize data privacy and governance?
Yeah, the points raised by Alan and Rajan are critically important, right? That awareness, that cultural change, education. But the other thing I think you have to do that I would offer is make it easy and make it automated as much as possible. If you're a big company that's handling, mistakes happen, oversights happen. You're never going to be able to have, in IBM anyway, 400,000 privacy experts in every regulation across the globe, and understanding from a marketing perspective when you're reaching out to somebody that happens to be on a do not call list for a particular product or whatever that might be, right? So I think that's one thing that we are very focused on my team in the Chief Privacy Office, is to automate as much as possible to make it as easy as possible for people to comply with the global regulations.
I want to thank you so much, everyone, because we all know and we're very grateful. We know how busy you are, and we're very grateful you took the time to share today and also to be available in the live Q&A, which will start right now. Thanks again to our guest speakers, Inderpal Bhandari, Rajan Mehta, Alan Crane, and Christina Montgomery from IBM. We're going to open it up now for some live Q&A. Our first question is for Rajan. Based on your successful implementation of data-driven change at WWE, especially regarding data privacy, what advice would you give to your peers who are facing the same issues?
Yeah, David, I would say there is multiple things to do, right? And you got to look at, again, people, process, technology. So the first one on the people side, one of the things that we did is, taking a look at external parties, subject matter experts that can help us, and really looking at all the various regions. And then you start getting into, new talent and ensuring we have the right people in the right roles, create new roles as necessary. And then you start looking at the overall processes that you have. What are the manual processes? How do you automate and leverage technology? It's almost like not a single thing you can do. You got to do a huge, not a huge, but a lot of different factors to make it all work together.
Alan, thank you for sharing some great insights on how USAA continues to be a gold standard for customer experience, loyalty, trust, and engagement. Can you expand more on the importance of putting the customer in the center of everything USAA does, especially at a time when so many people and companies are being affected by weather-related disasters and, of course, the pandemic?
Yes, certainly. USAA has always been about our members since our beginning 98 years ago, and certainly now in these days of COVID. And we actually do have a couple of catastrophic storms going on right now as well, that we are there for our members as well. So within the pandemic, our response has been across many, many efforts, but I'll highlight kind of the three big areas. So first, with the pandemic, we recognized almost immediately that our members are driving less. They're getting into fewer accidents. They're having fewer claims. So as a result, our insurance company decided that the right thing to do was to give back more than $1 billion in dividends back to our members. So that's a very significant item. Second, our bank has done things to help members that are affected by the pandemic and work with them, creating arrangements for them, helping them navigate their finances that are during this pandemic that are all too new and rare for anyone to have a clear path for. Folks that are in our bank are experiencing this and having these conversations on a many times a day basis. So there's getting a lot of experience with what kinds of things can USAA do to help our members navigate such times. And then third, our community impact. USAA has contributed more than $30 million to COVID-19 relief efforts in our communities and across the military community. And so, what it really comes down to is this: without the member, none of this data stuff matters. So everything that we do is continue to put that member in the center. And even when it's for sales, for service, for advice, or in this case, in response to the global pandemic that we're all facing.
For Christina, I really liked your comment at the end, that data privacy policy needs to be both automated and easy. Can you elaborate a little bit further on the importance of automating the decision-making processes around privacy policies?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to two big areas: scaling with precision and driving evidence-based compliance. So, for us, just to give you a sense of the size of the compliance challenges, as a controller, we have thousands of assets and applications around the globe. And Interpol spoke earlier today about the complexity of our offerings, our services, our business is very complex. And so we take a global approach to processing, and automation makes it possible for us to apply policies in practice whenever a new asset comes on board, a new asset owner comes on board, or to easily adapt our practices and our policies to new regulations. So not every tool and every asset owner across our global business has to be a privacy expert. Automation gives you the ability to do things like classify data, automate tools for evidence in the event of things like internal audit or regulatory requests and responding to those easily. And to see how you're doing to measure, as I mentioned earlier, like giving, business units KPIs, how are you doing, and checkups kind of thing. And then on the point of precision, it gives you the ability, data classification in particular, to allow for precision policy enforcement. So you can identify, and Interpol spoke about this a little bit earlier as well, identify which assets are in scope for which regulations and drive and remediate those in particular without impacting out of scope areas, or identifying high risk processing activities driving data privacy impact assessments where needed and the like, or triggering legal reviews. This all helps with consistent policy enforcement across the globe.
And lastly, for Interpol, how do companies use governance frameworks to deliver actionable information in real time while ensuring compliance regarding data policy?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, Dave. That is an excellent question, because eventually for business, it's all about speed and speed to insight, speed to action, etc. That's what eventually translates to your bottom line improving or your top line growing. But what also has to happen now is you need to make the privacy decisions, the security decisions also in real time so that you kind of keep pace with what's going on. And so the points that Christina raised about automation, they kind of go to that. They just have to go hand in hand now. And I'll give you some examples from, I touched on some of these this earlier, that you could have somebody who is logging in from the US on a certain set of data, and that's fine. But the same person with the same role, if they try to do it from a different country, it may not be fine. And you need to make those kinds of decisions in real time.
Yeah.
You've got other examples. You might have access to some data in general, but when your company is in a blackout period, you don't. Again, those types of real-time decisions that have to be made, you have to keep pace with what's going on with the scale at which business operates today. These things have to be built in. And I made the point about the hybrid cloud earlier on that, because that has to support a multitude of environments, in a sense, it is incumbent on anybody who is a hybrid cloud provider to ensure that you've simplified data privacy and security across that multitude of environments. Otherwise, it's not. I mean, you don't really have an offering, in my view. If you just put it out there and say the onus is on the customer to figure all that out, you can't do it. That has to be embedded in the definition of hybrid cloud, that the appropriate access to data, that's simplified by the environment itself. I want to touch on a couple of other points, though, because we've talked about automation and runtime and so forth. But Rajan and Alan, they both mentioned this, right? Rajan talked about the culture aspect of this, getting your people to understand how important this aspect is. Alan talked about putting the member in the center and so forth. And I touched on earlier about that example of derived data, especially when you go to these higher end analytics, AI, et cetera, you're creating new data. You don't know going in what you're going to create. It could be very sensitive. And the coaching I like to give our people is, if you come across something like that and you can identify the person and you're about to take some action, pause. Think about, if you do that, if it was your wife, your daughter, your son, your husband, your father, your mother, would you do it? And if the answer is, I don't know, don't do it. So you kind of have to bring that aspect of a human value into the equation. And that's a big part now also of our focus in AI. So the stuff that we're doing with explainable AI and so forth, part of that is also about bringing human values into the AI so that when you do this kind of automation, you're able to bring in those aspects as well. Strategically, that's how we're thinking about it. I'm not saying we've got that figured out. I'm just saying strategically, that's going to be a key piece of what we need to do. So it's exactly the point you raised, right? It also applies to AI. You're not going to get 400,000 AI experts. There are fields within AI, like deep learning, where maybe you have a handful of people who even understand how to really apply it. I'm not talking about the academics and so forth, but in terms of actually taking that forward, doing all the right things, making sure that your models don't drift, making sure that your results are accurate and so forth, they're not biased. There's not that many people. So what the mindset that you have to do, the mindset you have to have is one of enablement. You want to enable the organization to be able to do it. And you do that by coming in, by putting together this central capability that actually enables the organization to move forward with data, AI, governance, etc. And I think that's what we've tried to show our customers, because taking advantage of the fact that IBM is about as complex an environment as you could get. It's an over 100-year-old company. There's a lot of legacy. We're far-flung, we're global. We have lots of business units. We have products that are very different from each other just because they span, multiple eras in time and so forth. If you're able to create this kind of capability in that environment, it just becomes a good reference point for our clients and customers. Their situations won't look exactly like that, but they'll be able to relate as a reference to what we're doing and apply it back in this situation. So that was really the model behind, Caitlin's AI accelerator and so forth, and what we do. And we've been very transparent. We've talked about all our pain points. We've never said that, the products that we have are going to work flawlessly. In fact, these things are all very hard, very difficult, but you can put them together, and you have to just continually strive to stay ahead, one step ahead. Eventually, it's about, and Mike, our guest touched on this, right? It's about the member, it's about the consumer, it's about the people aspect of this that that becomes relevant. And you see that in the regulations as there's more control being given to the individuals, as people have realized that it's not the way the game's being played right now, may not be the best thing for the future.
I remember you and I were chatting offline, and I had worked at Reuters during Y2K. It was my job to see that some of the programs and products were Y2K compliant. And this is like Y2K every day. I mean, there's going to be a new privacy regulation. These things are coming out all the time. We're going to see more than just Euro GDPR and the California CPA. And the ability to scale, to scale your privacy policy process is really, really important. So what you've done in automating this and making it really easy to use internally at IBM is just an exemplar for the rest of the organizations out there. So kudos to you and the team. And thanks again to all of our guest speakers, Rajan Mehta and Alan Crane, Christina Montgomery, and of course, Inderpal Bandari for joining us today. And most of all, we want to thank all of you for participating once again, and also for the incredible work that you're doing in these extremely challenging and unprecedented times. As Inderpal mentioned, we do hope to see you again in October. The IBM CDO Summit Series continues on October 14th as we explore hybrid multi-cloud use cases at scale. And for reference, you might want to check back on our August event where we had CDOs and CTOs in partnership, and Chris Wright from Red Hat and Inderpal had some extremely eloquent comments around the hybrid cloud use cases. So we'll dig deeper into that in October. Meantime, I hope everybody stays safe and healthy. And with that, for closing comments, I'm delighted to reintroduce Caitlin Halferty, the Director of the AI Accelerator and Client Success over at IBM.
Thank you, Dave. Let me just echo a couple closing comments. So thank you to our guests for sharing their expertise. And as Dave mentioned, we're heading into the end of our Summit Series. So we kicked off in June. In case you missed any of those early sessions, we encourage you to take advantage. We have those available for replay. Please share them with your teams. And what we'd like to do in these last sessions is really focus on actionable use cases that you can take and implement within your own enterprises and organizations. So we'll come back in October with a deep dive on some hybrid cloud use cases around data privacy, security governance, as well as other topic areas. So my request to the community, if there are use cases that you're seeing within your own enterprise and company that are driving a lot of value for you, please share those with us so we can highlight and showcase that to the community. If there are others that you're interested in learning more about, please give us that feedback as well. I just took a look at the participant list for today's session, and I know many of us are 6 months plus into working from home and balancing COVID responsibilities, and yet we had close to 100 participants from around the world, from many different industries and companies and roles. And the strength of our community, I think, in large part, is the quality of our panelists and our speakers. So thank you again for joining us as speakers. Thank you for joining today in the session. I see a couple of questions that came in that we didn't get a chance to address in today's session. We'll make sure we get those answered and get a response out to you. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, everybody.